the motel room. It was just past 3 a.m. when Sarah's car sputtered to a complete stop on the deserted stretch of rural highway. She let out an exasperated groan and smacked the steering wheel in frustration. Of course her ancient Honda would choose tonight of all nights to finally give up the ghost. Sarah pulled off onto the narrow shoulder, flicking on her hazard lights as the heavy downpour of rain hammered relentlessly against the car. She dug out her cell phone, but just her luck, no signal. Letting out a weary sigh, Sarah peered out across the pitch-black countryside, trying to assess her situation. Up ahead, a faint neon glow pierced the night. A motel sign, her only hope of finding shelter, and a working phone to call for a tow truck. Sarah zipped up her hooded jacket, threw open the car door, and started the long walk up the road towards the flickering promise of roadside lodging. By the time she arrived at the motel entrance, Sarah was soaked to the bone and shivering violently despite her layers of clothing. She hurried under the covered portico, relieved to be out of the stinging rain. The sign above the office simply read "Motel" in fading red neon tubing. A vintage style that hinted this place was frozen in the 1960s. Sarah hesitated at the front door's tarnished handle, something seeming oddly off about this place. Between the sheets of rain, she could just make out the harsh glow of a solitary security light illuminating the motel parking lot, empty except for her car somewhere back along the road and a rusted-out Oldsmobile from what looked like the 80s. An uneasy feeling began creeping up Sarah's spine, urging her to turn around right then and just keep walking through the night. But with no other options, she reluctantly pushed inside the dim, musty-smelling lobby. An ancient sitting area with tape-patched chairs lined one wall, a dead plant wilting in the corner. To Sarah's dismay, the front desk sat empty and unmanned in the glow of a dust-caked desk lamp. Hello?" Sarah ventured, her voice sounding unnaturally loud. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but my car broke down and I need a room for the night." The only response was the muted ticking of an analog clock from somewhere back behind the desk. Sarah chewed her lip anxiously, debating whether to try the aged-looking brass bell sitting on the counter's scratched surface. Just then, a door creaked open to her left, startling Sarah as a hunched, slouched figure slowly emerged from the shadows. The flickering desk lamp's weak light revealed a tiny, aged woman with wispy white hair looking up at Sarah through thick glasses. "A room, you need," she wheezed in a dry, cracked voice. "Why yes, please," Sarah stammered, caught off guard. "I'll take anything you have available. Just for one night until I can get my car taken care of." The old woman silently squinted up at Sarah for an uncomfortably long moment, like she was sizing her up, making Sarah shift awkwardly from foot to foot. Then, without a word, she turned and shuffled towards a decrepit row of metal key slots mounted on the back wall. Most were empty, but a few had tarnished brass keys still dangling inside. For a long minute, the old woman just stood there unmoving, face nearly pressed against the key slots as if struggling to make a decision. Sarah started to ask what the process was for checking in, but before she could, the woman's liver-spotted hand shot out with lightning speed, snatching a specific key and whirling back around to face Sarah. "You'll have room 12, the old woman barked out, shoving the key roughly against Sarah's chest. There was a twisted, almost sinister glint in her beady eyes, now that sent a chill racing through Sarah's core. That's the only one available." Sarah eyed the woman with uncertainty, opening her mouth to ask for clarification. But the look on the woman's face made her think better of it. She simply nodded wordlessly and turned to leave. "You're leavin' by 10 o'clock sharp tomorrow," the woman hollered after her with a strange force, like a drill sergeant dishing out an order. "Not a minute stay past then." Sarah hurried out the door towards her designated room, her skin tingling with unease and a desire to get as far away from that creepy woman as possible. The aged metal numeral 12 was just about all she could make out through the sheet of rain in the darkness ahead. Room 12 was nestled in a shadowed corner of the sprawling two-story complex, its door weathered and varnish long peeled away. Sarah shuddered as she hurried forward, fishing out the rusted key and steeling herself against the onslaught of rattling rain. The knob and hinges protested with a shrill squeal of misuse as Sarah swung the door inward and slipped inside, relief washing over her at finally being out of the brutal downpour. She groped along the water-stained wallpaper for a light switch as the door slowly creaked shut behind her, casting the room into near-total darkness. But the single dim bulb she found provided only a weak, sickly glow that didn't do much beyond creating unsettling shadows dancing feverishly about the room. Sarah could just make out the outline of an aged double bed, a crooked dresser, and a surprisingly large bathroom area that seemed to consume one whole corner of the space. As her eyes strained to adjust to the low light levels, a putrid stench began creeping into Sarah's nostrils that instantly made her gag and clamp a hand over her mouth and nose. An overpowering reek of mildew, rot, and something stomach-churningly worse that she couldn't quite identify. Where on earth was that horrendous smell coming from? Maybe the bathroom. Sarah crossed the room, desperately fighting the urge to vomit from the stench, growing more overwhelming with each step. She tried the bathroom's light switch and to her confusion, it seemed to trigger a dimly flickering set of ancient heat lamps mounted to the ceiling that cast an eerie ruby glow over the entire space. That's when Sarah froze in abject horror. A deep, crimson-stained drainage trench ran the length of the sizable bathroom sectioned off into sides by a grated metal walkway. A thick, viscous liquid coagulated in the channel with chunks and debris of unidentifiable filth stirring in the sludgy mixture. From the very back, where the drain originated, a dozen or more gnarled black masses frothed and bubbled up with apparent movement. Sarah's whole body began convulsing as the grisly realization dawned on her: those lumps fused with filth and rot were human remains left forgotten to fester in this makeshift mass grave. Even in the disturbing shadows and ruby-tinted light, Sarah could now make out the macabre decorations adorning the bathroom walls, rib cages and femurs cobbled together into horrific displays of bones cracked open and hollowed out into some kind of sick tiki mugs. The flickering heat lamps caused their scorched edges to throw nauseating images dancing across the shadowed surfaces. She opened her mouth to scream, but only managed a choked gurgle of revulsion as the stench of death overwhelmed her senses. Gagging and stumbling from the gruesome scene, Sarah slammed the bathroom door behind her and ran for the exit only to find the door firmly, impossibly jammed. She pounded on the rotting wood in frantic desperation as panic entirely consumed her. This was no motel. This was a torture chamber from the deepest, darkest pit of hell itself. Just then, heavy footsteps began echoing from the far end of the room, thundering up the unseen gap in shadowy darkness beyond the bathroom. To her deepest, primal terror, two beady crimson orbs emerged and raised upwards, dizzying heights suggesting whatever monstrosity approached stood over 8 feet tall. In the pulsating glow, Sarah could just make out the clawing, distorted appendages of something not human clawing at the edges of the shroud of blackness. The stench of diseased, rotting organic material intensified tenfold as the towering nightmare that owned this place emerged, a low bestial grunting rising from its core. It's with that final realization of inescapable horror that Sarah slumped defeated to her knees, the last remnants of hope draining from her eyes. She would never know how this ungodly evil lured its victims here. Nor did she want to comprehend the unfathomably twisted mind that intended such depravity.